If you really analyze some of the fights in the TBC raids, you realize that many of them were just a copy-paste with some change to conceal. Kinda like when you pay the smart kid in school to do your homework, but change it slightly so it doesn't look the exact same. Hello guys and welcome to another video. I'm filling in for MetaGoblin today, since he can't go 5 seconds without coughing his guts up. My name is Cheddar and I stream Wrath of the Lich King classic content, as well as other variety of RPG games at twitch.tv/maturecheddar if you want to check me out. Today we are going to discuss whether Wrath of the Lich King Classic was better than the Burning Crusade Classic. We will analyze both games based on the biggest and most important topics, including class design, raiding, PvP, leveling, and quality of life. So let's jump in with class design. So in Wrath of the Lich King Classic, the talent trees of every spec were expanded and they received a number of changes. There were also several abilities added to the game, namely AoE abilities. Now every class has a form of AoE. For instance, the priest was given Mind Sear, Balance Druids had the cooldown on Hurricane removed and were given Starfall. The Red Paladin got Divine Storm and a Cleaving Judgment, and so on and so forth. One argument could be that this is a good change, because when you're a class that doesn't have AoE whilst clearing trash, the gameplay was pure boredom. From my experience anyway as a Shadow Priest, you just felt useless. The classic anti-argument here is that this homogenization of the classes takes away from class identity. In Vanilla WoW, where the classes are stripped back to their original form, each class does stand out more for their unique toolkit they can bring to a group. And although this is a nice commodity, I don't think giving every class some viable AoE DPS really takes away from class identity that much. For instance, the Druid is still the only class with a combat res, if you don't count the Death Knight Ghoul res. The Shaman is the only class with Bloodlust or Heroism, and every class provides their own unique buffs and debuffs. Sometimes there is a little overlap, like for instance how both the Mage and Warlock provide a 5% increased crit debuff, but in the long run, giving the same buff and debuffs to multiple classes, which is a massive quality of life improvement for raid leaders making comps. I don't think there is a massive class identity loss in Wrath of the Lich King Classic. I think this is more of a problem retail has, since multiple classes can bloodlust, combat res, and they actually remove most of the class buffs from the game. I also think the talent trees improve class design in many ways. For instance, warriors having talents allowing them to charge in combat. The removal of demonic sacrifice for warlocks meant that they could actually use their pets in a raiding environment, especially as all warlock pets also got the avoidance ability. Not to mention how the talents made more specs viable and competitive on the meters. I know that Red Paladins and Warriors probably don't share the same sentiments, but they will have their day. The only element of TBC class design that I think is better is actually the Red Paladin. In Wrath of the Lich King, they massively simplified the Red Paladin's playstyle and made seal twisting unviable. This means that many Red Paladins prefer the TBC playstyle to the Wrath of the Lich King one. But apart from this unique case overall, I think that only improvements were made to the class design in Wrath of the Lich King. Don't forget to thumbs up this video and subscribe for more content. Subscribe today for a chance to receive multiple layers in Dalaran on your server. The first thing I want to talk about when it comes to raiding is raid design and mechanics. We haven't really had a chance to experience the best of Wrath of the Lich King raiding yet. People who remember it from back in the day, or who have recently experienced it on private servers or PDRs, you will know what's up when Old Dwarf finally releases, as the quality of raiding grows by a country mile. But let's be honest, in TBC there were very few mechanics. So many different encounters used the same mechanics. Like for instance, the person who stood furthest away from the mob will get charged mechanic, which was a personal favourite of mine. Another worthy mention is the ad management encounter, as there were many of those. Examples such as Lurker, Lady Bash, Morogrim, Akama, a few examples popping in my head. We also can't forget to mention the 4 boss encounter with High King Mulgar, Moreau, Fathom Lord, Katie, Illidari Council. You get the idea. If you really analyze some of the fights in the TBC raids, you realize that many of them were just a copy-paste with some change to conceal. Kinda like when you pay the smart kid in school to do your homework, but change it slightly so it doesn't look the exact same. In Wrath of the Lich King, there will be more unique boss fights. And we've already seen a couple of examples, with Sartharion, Three Drakes, and Malagos. This isn't to say that TBC raiding was bad by any means. I had a lot of fun raiding in TBC, especially mirror progression, despite wiping over 150 times. And not to forget Kill Jaden and Illidan, which probably were some of the best fights in the whole expansion. But Wrath of the Lich King definitely beats TBC on uniqueness. Setting up your comp also works very differently in Wrath of the Lich King Classic. You no longer have to stack several of the same class, since many buffs are now raid-wide. For instance, Bloodlust, Moonkin Aura, Totem Wrath, Battle Shout, etc. It's now much easier to create good setups when making a team. There's also a lot less complaining from raid members, because you don't have to gimp the DPS by certain DPS classes being in certain groups. A classic example of this is the Warlock not being able to be with the Boomkins and the Elder Shaman groups, or a Fury Warrior and Rogue not being with the Feral Druid and Enhancement Shaman. So overall, I think this is just another big quality of life improvement. Now the big issue with PvP in TBC was the RNG dependencies. It was very often that games would be won or lost based purely on RNG more than player skill alone. Obviously, there's always a level of RNG involved in PvP, but in TBC it was on a different level. A classic example is CC immunity chance. For instance, the Priest and Orc have a 15% chance to totally resist stun, fierce, and silence effects. This stun resistance was a big issue for rogues, because it would totally mess up their opener, and there were many other instances where CC resistance would mess up games. Luckily, in Wrath of the Lich King, the CC resistance was changed to reduce the duration of CC effects instead. This is a great balance change, and I think most serious PvP players would agree that Arena in Wrath of the Lich King is much better. The numbers back it up too, since more players are playing in Arena in Wrath. On top of that, the official Blizzard Arena tournament have gained much more interest and traffic than what was expected. Wrath of the Lich King has received a number of leveling improvements, mostly when it comes to leveling speed. The amount of XP required to get to max level was reduced by 30%, and the XP you get from quests was increased. There were also many world changes, such as extra flight paths and graveyards, added to the game for extra convenience. And the big one being that you can now get a boat from Darkshore straight to Stormwind. So all the Night Elf players no longer had to do the deadly Wetlands run. This was especially good for new players, since they likely didn't know about the death skip that would take you straight to Dun Morogh. The in-game group finder has also proved to be a very useful and efficient tool to find groups in-game for dungeons while leveling. Before this tool was introduced, low levels had to share the Looking for Group channel with higher level dungeons and end-game raiders, so their Looking for Group message were most likely drowned out. It certainly doesn't help either that a lot could have had the Looking for Group chat turned off while they level. To end it off, heirlooms were also added to the game as a great way to speed up leveling for your alts. Now the only element where TBC wins over Wrath of the Lich King Classic is difficulty. The problem is with the increased player power and heirlooms introduced in Wrath of the Lich King Classic was that it made leveling too easy. You shouldn't feel like an absolute god as a low level player and be able to solo group quests just because you have heirlooms on. This discouraged players from making groups in order to complete content. The great thing about vanilla leveling is if you wanted to complete these quests with a great XP and loot rewards, you would have to make the effort and group up with other players in order to complete them. You were rewarded better for being in a group. This is socially driven content, the core essence of what an MMO is. And if people want to play WoW as a single player, then fair enough. But I think in order to get the best loot in an MMO game, you should actually have to group up and do the group content. TBC already made group quests much easier by making the mobs non-elite. This made it easier, but you would still probably need a +1 in order to complete these quests, because taking on multiple enemies could be a challenge. But in Wrath of the Lich King, all these quests became too much of a cakewalk. I think to compensate for increased player power and heirlooms, group quests should have become more challenging, but then rewarded with more XP. So to summarize this section, I think it's the socially driven low-level content that makes people go back to play vanilla WoW. It goes without saying that many quality of life improvements were added in Wrath of the Lich King Classic. For many people, some of these reasons are good enough to claim that Wrath Classic is better, and I definitely understand that. So I wrote a list of the top 10 improvements, starting with Dual Spec. Dual Spec allows you to experience more content without respecking every week. between PvP and PvE, for an example, or 2 different raid roles such as tank and DPS. With the option of barbershop, whatever you make in character selection screen isn't set in stone. You can change it later. Being able to change everything from hair to gender can give your game a visual change, not only by looks, but combat animations as well. Enchanting vellums are now making it easy for enchanters to sell and buy enchants through Auction House, but also sorting enchants out between your olds are made easier, when vellums are now making enchants a physical item. Reduced mount cost means that new players don't have to be extremely frugal while leveling, because the mount costs previously took all the precious gold you had. The addition of also buying it at level 20 instead of 40 is a nice bonus instead of walking. Pets and dots can now tag mobs. The worry of being out-tagged is drastically reduced for the affected classes in highly contested areas. Casting speed has been sped up for quest items in the open world. Increased ghost speed. Whether you play on PvP or PvE server, death is a likely occurrence. In the unfortunate event your character dies, the general increased ghost speed as well as flying mount ghost will make it a less of a hassle getting back to your corpse. No longer dismounting in water. This is the luxury you didn't think you wanted, but if it disappeared, you probably would be frustrated about it. Item stacking. Vast majority of items such as flasks and potions now stack to 20, whilst ammo now stacks to 1000. For those of you that play WoW, will know that bag space is precious and limited. The better item stacking certainly proves to be beneficial use for those with off-spec gear, as an example. Mount and pet tabs. Mounts and collective pets don't take up inventory space, as it is now saved as a collection. So those interested in collecting all mounts and pets do not have to worry about the space in their bags and banks. So in summary, Wrath of the Lich King Classic has definitely made a number of improvements to class design, raid gameplay, PvP balancing, and the leveling experience, which are hard to argue against. I can't imagine many players currently playing Wrath of the Lich King Classic would want to go back to TBC without all of the quality of life improvements. But there is still this silent creeping doom as Classic goes through the expansions. Soon, Classic won't be Classic anymore.